At the Swintons' estate, Kevin found out that his new foster sister was actually Brenda, who was a close friend of Penny and Mackenzie. But his other foster sister, Gail, took an instant dislike to him and called for help to have Kevin thrown out of their home. "Break his arms and legs, then toss him out in the street." Gail stood there with her hands on her hips looking very arrogant. "Yes, ma'am," the men replied. These people were the Swinton family's bodyguards, and they obeyed the orders of all the family members. "Stop!" Brenda hastily walked up to her sister and asked, "What are you doing? Kevin only said a few words to you." "Sis, you really don't like this poor loser, do you?" Gail looked at her sister in surprise. "You can't be serious. Thornton Huxley is still waiting for you to say yes to his proposal." Gail became even more anxious now. She shouted at the guards. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and do something. I don't want him to remain here for another second." "Don't you dare lift a finger," Brenda warned them all coldly. The two sisters' conflicting orders had put the bodyguards in a difficult position. Dealing with one person at a time wasn't a problem. But what were these two young women trying to do? They couldn't obey both of them at the same time. "Brenda, don't worry about it. As long as Father doesn't order it, no one will be able to kick me out of the Swinton family." Kevin broke the silence in the hall with a big grin on his face. He stomped his foot on the floor slightly, and a strong wave of energy was released in an instant. The entire room seemed to shake, and almost a dozen guards fell to the ground. Under the enormous pressure emanating from Kevin's body, their faces turned pale. They knew that Gail was making a serious mistake. However, they had to be on their guard against Kevin, and more importantly, they couldn't let anything happen to the two sisters. You're pretty powerful, aren't you?" Gail was shocked and ran to hide behind her sister. "Gail, you're my foster father's daughter. I'd never do anything to you. But don't think that I'm easy to bully." Kevin waved his hand forcefully. The bodyguards knew they couldn't defeat Kevin, so they all took a knee to show that they were beaten. "Apologize right now." Kevin stared coldly at Gail. "No, I don't believe that a loser like you would dare to do anything to me. If you do anything reckless, I'll have my father beat you to death." Although Gail was talking tough, she still kept hiding behind her elder sister. But right now all she felt toward Kevin was hatred. She would never apologize to him. "Kevin, for my sake, let's forget about all this. I apologize to you on behalf of my sister." Brenda wanted to slap the back of Gail's head. She couldn't believe that her sister could be so brainless. "Sis, what are you afraid of? This is our home, isn't it? Maybe I'll just call Thornton Huxley over here to teach Kevin a lesson." Gail was feeling overly confident. Brenda let out a heavy sigh. Her younger sister could still be so naive. Just then, a man walked into the room. "What happened? Why are these men all kneeling on the floor?" Gail became excited when she saw who it was. "Thornton Huxley, you're a sight for sore eyes. Hurry up and give me a hand. This poor slob has been bullying me." Thornton Huxley was the sole heir to his family's fortune in St. Louis, and he'd been pursuing Brenda for many years. In fact, Brenda went to Chicago so often, not just to relieve her boredom, but in order to avoid being bothered by him. He looked at Kevin, and a hint of disdain immediately appeared in his eyes. Very contemptuously, he sneered. "You've got a lot of guts, kid. How dare you cause trouble for the Swinton family? And what makes you think you can bully my little sister Gail? If you don't apologize to her right this second, there's no way you're walking out of here in one piece." "Thornton, what right do you have to tell me what to do in my own house? This is a private matter. It's Swinton family business. Please leave immediately and don't meddle in other people's affairs." Brenda didn't even want to look in his direction. As expected, Thornton's expression changed when he heard this. "Brenda, what did you just say? Could this guy be your younger brother?" Thornton then carefully looked Kevin up and down. He didn't see anything remarkable about him. On top of that, he'd been in St. Louis for many years, but he'd never heard of Richard having a son. Could this guy be Richard's illegitimate son? Thornton wondered. The contempt in his eyes grew even stronger. Although it was inevitable for big families to have some private secrets, nobody ever liked an illegitimate child. After all, it was too damaging to the family's reputation. If I can get the upper hand with this brat, I might be able to make a good impression on Richard, Thornton thought to himself. What are you talking about, Brenda? Am I an outsider or something? Thornton asked hesitantly. You're handsome and elegant. As far as I'm concerned, you'd make the perfect brother-in-law. You're definitely not an outsider in this family, Gail quickly asked. Thornton, look at this man. He's so poor, but he actually wants to marry my sister. Do you think he's delusional? Thornton was amused by the first part of Gail's sentence, but the second half really stunned him. It seemed that this kid wasn't Richard's illegitimate son after all, but instead he was a rival for Brenda's affection. What the hell is wrong with you, you loser? What right do you have to pick a fight with me? Brenda is mine, and don't you forget it. Get as far away from her as you can. Thornton had really gotten worked up over this. I think you're the one who should get out, Brenda snarled coldly. You don't actually like this guy, do you, Brenda? Thornton asked in surprise. How can someone like him even compare to me? As he said this, Thornton puffed out his chest and raised his chin, trying his best to show his handsome side. I won't allow you to put him down like that. Kevin is my fiancé who is betrothed to me. My father brought him here from Chicago so we can get married. Brenda smiled and held Kevin's arm as she leaned in close to him. When he felt the softness of her body against his own, Kevin was a little taken aback. I hate this guy. Please help me, Brenda whispered into Kevin's ear. However, her actions really upset Thornton. How could she be showing so much affection towards Kevin? After all, Thornton had been chasing after Brenda for years, but he'd never even held her hand. This poor slob suddenly appeared and he actually moved right in on her. It was absolutely unbearable for him. Listen, you bastard. Stay away from my Brenda. Otherwise I'll chop off your hand. Do you understand me? Thornton was so angry that he was about to lose control. What are you shouting for? You're scaring my fiancé. Kevin gently rubbed the back of Brenda's head and ran his fingers through her hair. Thornton couldn't take it any longer. He fiercely rushed up to Kevin and grabbed him by the collar. Can't you hear what I'm saying? I could have killed you with just one word. Thornton glared at Kevin fiercely. You could see the powerful energy flowing through the man's body. Let go of him. Brenda pushed Thornton away forcefully and yelled, I'm warning you. Kevin is my fiancé. If you try something like this in the future, you'll never be welcome in my home again. Her words hit Thornton like a thunderbolt, and he took a few steps back in shock. Suddenly, someone walked over to them. Is everyone home right now? When the people in the room heard her say this, they looked over and saw Nadia Alexander, who was wearing a long lavender dress as she stood there with a red box in her hand. Madam President, Thornton called out respectfully. 3 years before, Nadia Alexander had been his mentor, and with the help of his family's resources, he had advanced by leaps and bounds in herbalism. He'd gotten very close to qualifying to enter the Herbalist Society. This success had given him the confidence to think that he could marry the Swinton family's elder daughter. Hello, Madam President, Gail and Brenda called out at the same time. The guards, who were still kneeling on the floor, didn't even dare to raise their heads and look up. Nadia Alexander's title of Herbalist Society branch president had given her a great deal of prestige. No matter who saw her had to treat her with the utmost respect. There were also rumors that she had a close relationship with the leader of the Herbalist Society, so everyone understood that offending her was equivalent to indirectly challenging the Herbalist Society itself. However, Kevin was an exception. Hello, Brenda and Gail. After saying this, Nadia Alexander finally noticed that Kevin was also there. Her excitement was instantly apparent in her eyes. But she also noticed that Brenda was holding onto Kevin's arm and they looked like they were a couple. This caused Nadia to become very puzzled. Isn't Kevin already married? And didn't Thornton quite like Brenda? What are the two of them doing together now? Nadia was considering all kinds of possible explanations for this surprising development. But Thornton and the others thought that Nadia was remaining silent because she'd been offended by Kevin's lack of respect. You fool! Don't you know who is standing right in front of you? Hurry up and greet her properly, Thornton scolded Kevin. What Thornton was really trying to do was to show Brenda how capable he was. After all, he was the branch president's student and would make an ideal husband. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear what Thornton just told you? This is Nadia Alexander. Can you afford to offend her? Gail snarled at Kevin. Earlier, Kevin had asked Gail to apologize to him. Now the tables had turned and Kevin would have to say that he was sorry. Gail thought that she had the upper hand now. With Thornton's support, she'd be able to put Kevin in his place. But when she saw that Kevin didn't react for a long time, Brenda became even more anxious. Gail and Thornton finally relaxed a little. Now that Kevin had insulted such a powerful person, his life was probably over. But then, to everyone's surprise, Nadia announced, Mr. Williams doesn't need to apologize for anything. She would never forget the time when she was visiting the Thompson family. Joseph and Kyle Thompson's attitude towards Kevin was so respectful that they practically treated him like a father figure. Compared to them, what right did she have to make Kevin give her any special treatment? Everyone looked at Kevin in shock because of what Nadia had just said. What was going on here? Hi, everyone. We weren't out for long. Why is the house so lively? Richard slowly walked in with his wife. Because Catherine wasn't feeling well on the way to the mall, the two of them had decided to turn around and hurry back home. Mr. Swinton! Nadia nodded her head slightly as she greeted him. Because of her status, this was the most respect that she'd ever showed to anyone. Richard was pleased to see her, but he had no idea what Nadia was doing in his home. Nadia Alexander paid a surprise visit to the Swintons, and they were all wondering why she had decided to stop by. When Nadia walked in, the Swintons' bodyguards had just backed down from Kevin after being ordered by Gail to throw him out of the mansion. Richard Swinton was probably the most surprised of all. Why is Nadia Alexander here all of a sudden? Richard saw the bodyguards kneeling on the ground and a puzzled look flashed across his eyes. At a glance, Richard had a good idea of what was going on, but he didn't say it out loud. When they saw Richard walk in, the bodyguard slowly stood up from the ground and walked out of the room. Mr. Swinton, I have 2 matters to attend to today. The first thing is my student's marriage. Nadia Alexander glanced at Thornton, then her gaze stopped on Kevin. Thornton has been in love with your elder daughter for many years, so today I'm here on behalf of his family to arrange his marriage with Brenda. After saying that, Nadia slowly opened the red box in her hand. In an instant, everyone saw a colorful light emanating from the box. A glass powder pill? Kevin said as he squinted at the box. Kevin, do you know what this pill is? Richard asked as he stared at Nadia's gift. According to the information Richard had gathered, Kevin won first place in the Midwest Herbalism competition, but he didn't know the exact details of the contest's outcome. The glass powder pill is used to stabilize the foundation of someone's training. In a way, the main effect is to eliminate any hidden injuries someone may have suffered during their training. But Kevin hesitated for a moment before continuing. But this pill is only suitable for females to consume. When they heard Kevin say this, everyone looked over at Catherine. In the Swinton family, Brenda and Gail were considered to be very delicate and precious. So the only person the pill could be intended for would be their mother, Catherine. In fact, very few people knew that roughly 25 years before, when Richard and Catherine were traveling around the country, they'd been the victims of a surprise attack that almost killed them. During the fight, Catherine used her body to block a fatal palm strike meant for Richard. Although the two of them managed to escape in the end, their lives were in grave danger. Fortunately, Alan Williams saved them, which was why they were still alive today. It was a pity that Richard hadn't yet made a decision to marry Catherine at that time. The relationship between the Armstrong family, that was Catherine's maiden name, and the Swinton family ended up becoming hopelessly strained. Many of their relatives had been opposed to their relationship. Richard waited until the Swintons had chosen him to be the head of the family before proposing to Catherine. She suffered for the rest of her life from the internal injuries she received during the fight. The two families spent a lot of effort and finally found that in order to cure her, she needed the glass powder pill. Unfortunately, the formula had always been under the control of the Herbalist Society, and there were very few herbalists who were capable of making it. So for all these years, Richard took care of Catherine and doted on her. He always felt a little guilty about what had happened to her. After all, he was the one who should have been injured instead of her.
Nadia, why don't we talk about the second thing?
Richard didn't really want to discuss a marriage with Thornton. Richard had been around the block a few times, and he knew that there were bound to be some strings attached. The second thing I'd like to discuss is an invitation for the entire Swinton family to join the Herbalist Society. What do you think? Nadia asked him with a faint smile. If you agree to the marriage between Thornton and Brenda, then I'll give you this glass powder pill. Also, as long as you join the Herbalist Society, then we'll all be considered family from now on. Wouldn't that be a win-win situation? It would certainly bring us all closer to each other. Wow, a chance to join the Herbalist Society. Daddy, please agree, Gail said excitedly. Thornton couldn't help but feel proud of himself. This was the foundation of the Huxley family and also the biggest bargaining chip he could use to marry Brenda. At the same time, he didn't forget to look at Kevin with disdain as if he was telling him,
"Did you see that? This is the difference between the two of us. I have Nadia Alexander as my mentor, and I can also give the Swinton family a chance to join the Herbalist Society. I'm the only one who's worthy of Brenda's hand. You should just pack up and head home."
Catherine was really moved by the offer. For all these years, Richard had put a lot of effort into treating her injuries. It was something that hung over them all the time. Richard tightly clenched his fists. The glass powder pill was indeed something he wanted very much, but his daughter Brenda wouldn't be happy with Thornton. In his heart, Richard knew that it would be a horrible marriage. On top of that, Richard already had someone in mind to be his daughter's husband. Besides, the Swinton family had long been out of the public eye. There wasn't any need for them to join the Herbalist Society.
"Mr. Swinton, have you thought about it? As long as you agree to let Brenda marry me, then our two families will have an unbreakable bond. If we work together, all of St. Louis will become ours," Thornton said excitedly. He'd been waiting for this day for too long. "Nadia, I can agree to join the Herbalist Society, but only if you let me have the glass powder pill,"
Richard replied as he looked Nadia in the eyes. "What do you mean?" Nadia frowned and said, "This pill is a gift that I'm only offering for the promise of marriage between Brenda and Thornton." Her meaning was very clear. If Richard wanted the pill, he had to agree to the marriage.
"If that's the case, then we have nothing more to talk about. Take care of yourself and have a good day."
Richard gestured toward the front door. "Richard!" Catherine cried out. "Father!" Gail pouted. Catherine and Gail voiced their opposition at the same time, but they were stopped by Richard, who held up his palm like a police officer directing traffic. This made the smile on Thornton's face disappear. He thought that with Nadia Alexander and the glass powder pill on his side, he would definitely be able to beat Kevin. He didn't expect that Richard would turn down the offer. "Mr. Swinton, forgive me, but I have to speak up. Although the Swinton family is very large and does a lot of business, there's something you should keep in mind. My student Thornton is also from a rich family. This marriage would definitely be a good match that would benefit both families. Don't you want the best for your daughter?" Nadia had a disappointed look on her face.
"Madam President, you might not know this, but my daughter Brenda and my adopted son Kevin were supposed to be engaged," Richard replied plainly. Although the Huxley family had a lot of influence in St. Louis, the Swinton family wasn't afraid of them. As far as Richard was concerned, even though Thornton was pretty good compared to other young men in the city, there was still an enormous gap between him and Kevin. "Dad, how can you let my sister marry this nobody?" Gail anxiously protested. "Stay out of this. Why are you interrupting when the adults are talking?"
Richard reprimanded her harshly.
"It's all my fault for pampering you so much that you don't respect your elders anymore."
"Hubby, don't talk to Gail that way. She's still young and inexperienced." Catherine quickly protected her younger daughter. "Although Kevin is Alan's son, and even though he..." She didn't finish what she was saying, but the meaning was very clear. Kevin's family was no longer the same as before. Kevin was even someone else's son-in-law. To put it bluntly, he wasn't worthy to become part of their family.
Even though he what? Back then, the only honorable thing to do was to offer Alan and Susan our daughter. It was only natural for the two of them to get married. Do you want me to go back on my promise? Richard said excitedly. Catherine, don't forget that Kevin's father saved our lives.
Gail poked her head out from behind her mother and complained to her father. I don't care what you say, Dad. I'll never agree to let Brenda marry this kind of person. Is he anything like Thornton?
You don't have any say in this. This was already arranged years before you were even born. If you say another word, I'll send you to your room and make you sit in the corner.
Richard's temper had finally risen. He didn't care what any outsiders thought. He needed to set his daughter straight. Nadia's expression changed slightly when she heard Richard talking like this. She'd never known that Kevin actually had such a distinguished family background.
Mr. Swinton, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that my family isn't worthy of your attention?
Thornton was so angry that his body began to tremble. How could someone choose Kevin over him? It was unthinkable.
Wait until you're the head of the Huxley family. Right now, I don't have to listen to you.
Richard glanced at him indifferently.
I refuse to accept this, Thornton started to complain.
Shut up! Nadia suddenly scolded Thornton and then looked deeply into Kevin's eyes. Finally, she looked back at Richard. I think I'm being rude to Mr. Williams. Richard and the others were stunned when they heard her say this. They didn't understand what Nadia Alexander meant. After all, she was the president of the Midwest branch of the Herbalist Society. How could she call a young man like Kevin Mr. and also be so respectful? Catherine looked at Kevin in disbelief. She thought to herself, he's already been kicked out of the Williams family. Could it be that he has some kind of shocking secret that no one knows about? Everyone was shocked to hear Nadia Alexander being so respectful to Kevin. He obviously had some kind of secret that made him far more powerful and important than he appeared to be. No wonder Richard preferred Kevin over Thornton when it came to choosing a husband for his daughter Brenda. Brenda's hand froze as she held Kevin's arm. Richard Swinton was the only one who reacted, and he was very excited. Nadia Alexander's performance only proved that Kevin was an outstanding young man and that even the Herbalist Society was interested in him. Thornton looked at his mentor in disbelief as he stood there motionless, rooted to the ground.
Miss Alexander, what do you mean? Thornton asked in a daze.
Thornton, since Brendan Swinton is engaged to Mr. Williams, you should give up on this idea. Nadia didn't dare to offend Kevin simply on account of the Huxley family's reputation. No, I don't agree with this. Mr. Huxley, you must not give up. Aren't you Nadia Alexander's student? Then you should compete with this slob in an herbalism contest. Whoever wins will be worthy of marrying my sister. Gail tried her best to speak confidently. Richard Swinton was thoroughly annoyed by this.
Someone send Gail up to her room. No one is allowed to let her out without my permission.
But Richard, how can you be so angry with Gail? Catherine hurriedly hugged her daughter and tried to stop the bodyguards who were walking in the room. This scene had happened countless times before in the Swinton family household, so Richard had no choice but to give in. However, Gail's words undoubtedly caused Thornton to become agitated.
You obviously have some knowledge of herbalism. However, would you dare to compete with me in a head-to-head contest?
Thornton pointed at Kevin and sneered.
If you don't agree to this, then you should get out of the Swinton family immediately. You'll never be able to step foot in St. Louis for the rest of your life.
And what happens if I win and you lose? Kevin asked him calmly.
Kevin, Richard called out anxiously.
Although he didn't like Thornton all that much, he had to admit that the young man was very talented, especially in the few years he'd been learning from Nadia Alexander. His herbalism skills had improved by leaps and bounds, and he couldn't find a worthy opponent among the younger generation in St. Louis.
Father, don't worry, Kevin comforted him confidently.
However, Thornton acted like Kevin had made a huge joke, and Gale also laughed along with him.
You really think I'll lose? Thornton pointed at his chest and laughed so hard that he could barely speak.
You clown! Are you trying to make me die of laughter? Why don't you go out and ask about my reputation in St. Louis? If he loses to you, I'll personally wash your feet for you tonight. Gale laughed so hard that tears were starting to flow from her eyes. I'll remember your offer. When this is over, you won't be crying from laughter. You'll be crying from regret, Kevin replied coldly.
If you insist on pressing for this contest, I'll make a promise to you here and now. If I lose, I'll kneel down in front of you and shine your shoes. Then I'll disappear and never bother the Swinton family again.
Thornton was bragging like this contest was a sure thing. Be careful what you promise, Thornton. Nadia quickly tried to dissuade him. She knew Kevin's skill in herbalism. He could even refine a soul-suppressing pill and a life prolongation pill. His talent in herbalism was far greater than hers. How could Thornton, a second-rate student, be compared to him?
Teacher, don't worry. I won't lose this contest no matter what,
Thornton declared as he puffed out his chest. Do you have anything that can be used to concoct pills in the house? Kevin turned around and asked respectfully. He didn't bring anything with him when he came to the Swinton family's home, so he needed to borrow the ingredients if he was going to make any herbal medicine. Richard Swinton looked at Kevin, and when he saw that the young man was so full of confidence, he let out a deep sigh and said,
Everybody come with me.
Even though the popularity of herbalism had gradually withered over the years, herbal pills had recently become very popular. The Swinton family had a long history in herbalism, so they always kept the right equipment on hand. The estate was quite large, and the Swinton family lived in relative seclusion. Because the pill refinement contest could cause the cauldron to explode, the pill refinement room was placed deep in the dense woods to the northwest of the family's mansion. The Swintons had a large staff of employees who took care of the cooking, maintenance, cleaning, and other duties, including bodyguards. They all started to whisper to each other. Have you heard? Kevin wants to compete with Thornton in an herbalism contest. Of course I knew that. I just saw Mr. Swinton take everyone to the pill room. Seems like even Nadia Alexander is here, one of them replied. I wonder how skilled he is in herbalism. Thornton is one of the most outstanding young men in all of St. Louis, the other staff member said. I only give him a 20% chance of winning. After all, Thornton is a direct student of Nadia Alexander, another one of them remarked. Mr. Williams, for my sake, can you not beat Thornton too badly? Nadia begged helplessly. He's still young, but he's also hot-tempered and often acts on impulse. If he insults you, I'll apologize on his behalf, but if you make him look bad, I'm afraid he'll never get over it. We can talk about that later. He may be young, but I'm not that old myself, Kevin commented. Since it was Thornton's idea to do this, Kevin just had to teach the guy a lesson. Richard Swinton and his wife were walking in front of the group, but they clearly overheard Kevin and Nadia talking. Richard and Catherine looked at each other in shock. Could it be that Kevin's herbalism skills are really that advanced? Even Nadia Alexander feels ashamed at being inferior to him. The two of them wondered. Mr. Huxley, you must win the contest. Otherwise, I'll have to wash that jackass's feet, Gale said as she pulled on Thornton's arm.
Don't worry, Gale. I'll make him get out of St. Louis for good.
Thornton's tone was very firm. Brenda, who was walking next to them, heard Thornton's boast and looked at him as if he was an idiot.
Brenda, why are you looking at me like that? Am I so handsome you can't take your eyes off of me?
Thornton tossed his long hair back and posed like he was a model.
I'll definitely prove to your parents that I'm the most qualified man to marry you. You should start getting ready for that wedding.
Brenda didn't respond to him and slightly shrugged her shoulders. Kevin could even successfully refine a repair pill, which meant that his herbalism skills had already surpassed Thornton's by miles. After more than 10 minutes, the group finally arrived at the herbalism room. Nadia immediately started setting the rules for the competition. The two of you can go inside and choose the medicinal ingredients yourselves. There's no time limit. But if you fail to make your herbal pill, you'll be judged as the loser." The Swinton family sat down at a picnic table outside. Although the family hadn't produced any top herbalists in many years, they had collected a lot of precious herbs and other ingredients. Kevin casually gazed around the pill refining room. He almost lost his composure when he saw how well stocked it was. Cloud pine grass? Holy crap! How much is all that worth? He thought to himself as he examined all the containers. They were all first-rate herbs, some of which were thought to be extinct. Kevin sighed when he saw all the choices he had. Just then, Thornton suddenly called out to him,
"Hey, bozo, how'd you like to raise the stakes?"
"What do you want to bet?" Kevin replied distractedly. He was still too excited to pay much attention to his adversary.
"If you lose, you'll have to duck and walk out of the Swinton family's courtyard. At the same time, you'll have to shout that Brenda is Thornton's wife," he said in a very snotty tone of voice. Thornton didn't plan for Kevin to win Brenda's hand in marriage so easily. He wanted to embarrass Kevin so much that he'd never be able to show his face in St. Louis. "I can promise you that, but if you lose, you have to be my personal assistant for 3 years. Kevin answered playfully. "Well, you'd better keep your promise."
After saying this, Thornton decisively turned his head and began to seriously search for the medicinal herbs he needed. Kevin thought for a moment and was soon ready to refine a medicinal pill. Half an hour later, the two of them finally took out what they needed from the tens of thousands of herbs. By then, the Swinton family's domestic help who came to watch the show had already filled half of the courtyard. With a lot of noise, 2 large cauldrons were brought out and placed in the middle of the courtyard. They were way bigger than the one that Kevin had used at the contest in Grant Park. Is this a purple gold bronze furnace? Kevin's eyes grew wide in amazement.
"Oh, haven't you ever seen a fancy one like this before?"
Thornton looked over at him with disdain. "What are you two waiting for? Hurry up and start making your pills," Brenda scolded them angrily. Thornton let out a disdainful snort. After lighting the fire, he put the herbs into the furnace and began refining them step by step. Everything seemed to be going as planned, and he wasn't running into any problems. The crowd of household employees started commenting on how well Thornton was doing. They expected as much from him since he was Nadia's top student. They wondered what miracle medicine he would prepare this time. One of them was so excited that he'd run through the woods in his underwear just to see. Everyone was curious to see how the contest would end. As Kevin and Thornton started making their herbal meds, the Swinton family staff gathered around and started commenting on how talented Thornton was. They thought that he'd win the contest hands down. Their fawning compliments not only made Thornton smile complacently, but also made him look mockingly at Kevin, who had yet to make a move.
"Hey, haven't you even started yet? At this rate, you're going to lose for sure."
Thornton could already imagine Kevin duck-walking across the family's estate. A few minutes later, there was still no movement from Kevin, which caused everyone to be puzzled. What's Kevin up to? Why hasn't he done anything yet? One of the onlookers wondered out loud.
"Could it be that he doesn't know how to concoct pills after all?"
Another one replied. Some of them thought that Kevin was being extra careful because his opponent had so much advanced training. He was obviously feeling pressured not to make any mistakes. But they were careful not to be insulting because they knew that Mr. Swinton had adopted Kevin into the family. Richard Swinton frowned and put down the cup of coffee he was holding.
"Why hasn't Kevin started making his pill yet?"
"I think he must have been scared silly by Mr. Huxley's skill. We already know how this match will turn out. I told you that Mr. Huxley is the only man worthy of marrying my big sister." Gail nibbled on the desserts that the waitstaff had brought out, but she was careful not to say anything too loudly because she was very afraid of her father's reaction. "Hubby, do you think that maybe Kevin doesn't know how to concoct herbal pills? Is that why he's behaving like this?" Catherine asked hesitantly. Even though she didn't dislike Kevin, she also didn't have a very good impression of him either.
"Maybe Kevin is just thinking about it."
Although Richard Swinton had been training for years, he knew relatively nothing about herbalism. When Thornton finished refining all his herbs, Kevin suddenly opened his eyes and finally made his move. He slapped the lid of the cauldron. Then he grabbed all sorts of different ingredients and he stuffed them all into the furnace at once. It looked like he didn't care what their attributes were. "What the heck is he doing?" one of the onlookers asked. "Don't tell me he really doesn't know how to concoct pills and he's just making it up as he goes along," another one commented. They were all pretty sure that this wasn't how to make herbal meds and that Kevin was definitely going to lose the contest. Finally, one of the staff members remarked, "What I'm most worried about isn't whether Kevin will lose, but rather whether there will be an explosion. Let's stand further back." Everybody in the front row began to slowly move backwards. When Richard Swinton saw this going on, he almost spat out his coffee. "Ha! I'm dying of laughter. Does this goofball think he's cooking a stew or something?" Gail laughed until she was doubled over. "It looks like your foster son is going to lose for sure. This really looks like a call for help," Catherine said with some regret. "It's a pity that all those valuable medicinal herbs are going to waste. If you want to find more to replace them, it will cost a pretty penny." Brenda also shook her head a few times. It was obvious that Kevin had already lost the contest. "Perhaps he just made that repair pill from Mackenzie by accident," Brenda secretly thought in her heart. But Thornton was already letting this go to his head. He could imagine how it was going to look when he and Brenda stepped into the wedding hall. After stuffing more than 10 kinds of herbs into the furnace, Kevin lit the fire and a flame rose from the bottom of the surface. It looked like he was controlling it with his hands. Is he controlling the fire with his body? Nadia Alexander stood up from her chair in surprise. In fact, she had been staring at Kevin from the very beginning. Thornton was her own student, and she knew very well that he couldn't do anything like that. "What's Kevin doing with the flame? Do you know anything about that, Dad?" Gail asked with a puzzled expression. Richard blushed and coughed awkwardly. "Madam President, could you please explain what it means to control fire with air movement?" Nadia was happy to reply. This technique was developed long ago. A supreme herbalist created a way to use his own hands to control the intensity of the pill fire. That way he could use the most appropriate flame for the pill he was creating. However, most of those methods have been lost, she continued. Even our herbalist society only has a few records of them. But one thing I know for sure is that it takes someone with very developed internal energy to do it successfully. Plus, this method takes a lot of training and can be very draining on someone, so it hasn't become very popular. But Kevin is definitely using a secret herbalism technique. The more Nadia Alexander spoke, the more excited she became. It was as if she wanted to immediately run up to Kevin and ask him to be her mentor. Everyone there was shocked to hear Nadia's explanation. They looked at Kevin in disbelief. No one would have thought that he, this ordinary-looking guy, actually knew an ancient secret herbalism technique. "Well, refining pills doesn't rely solely on controlling the heat. He would definitely fail if he stuffed all the medicinal ingredients into his mouth," Gail said in a very unconvinced tone of voice. "I'm sorry, Gail, but you're only half right. You might not know this, but herbalists who are able to master this secret technique are at least at the Grand Master level of herbalism." Nadia sounded a little embarrassed to admit it. She'd been trying to reach the Grand Master level for many years, but had reached a bottleneck and had never found the way to break through. Suddenly, Kevin shouted loudly and slammed the lid of the furnace hard on the side. Under the impact of the heat, all the herbs flew out. "Like I said, that goofball is just trying to attract everyone's attention. I'm sure he doesn't know anything about making herbal pills," Gail said complacently. Thornton also looked at Kevin with disdain. "How can you even think of stealing my girl away from me when your abilities are so inadequate? You're just making a fool of yourself by showing off like this in front of a true expert. I'm looking forward to seeing you duck walk across the estate grounds." As the saying goes, don't count your chickens or your ducks before they're hatched. After a brief moment of shock, Nadia Alexander saw the most crucial detail of Kevin's technique. Although the medicinal herbs were flying up in the air, it wasn't chaotic and disorganized. They were all spinning around in an orderly manner under Kevin's control. At the same time, the medicinal properties of the ingredients were being compressed together. My God, is his herbalism level really that advanced? Nadia secretly sighed as she watched. About 10 minutes later, the numerous herbs gradually condensed into a ball of light in the air. Under Kevin's control, they once again returned to the furnace.
What's the use of returning them to the furnace? The medicinal properties have already been exhausted. Even if the final pill is formed, it will only be a low-grade medicinal pill. You've already completely lost this competition.
After thinking about these things, Thornton slapped his palm on his own cauldron. A rich medicinal fragrance was being emitted from his pill furnace, and a reddish-orange-colored cloud appeared in the air above Thornton's head. Wow, Mr. Huxley is really powerful. Gail excitedly clapped her hands.
Everyone look, it's a two-colored cloud,
one of the onlookers cried out. They were all amazed that Thornton had created his herbal pill in such a short period of time. It looked like Kevin was definitely going to lose, but to lose to an expert like Thornton Huxley wasn't such an embarrassing thing. Nadia looked pleased when she saw the two-colored pill cloud, but she knew it was far from enough to defeat Kevin. Hubby, I don't think I need to watch the rest of this competition, do I? It's obvious who will win. Catherine looked at Thornton with admiration. Although Kevin's manipulation technique is very fancy, he still needs to rely on his true strength to concoct pills. Richard Swinton looked over at Kevin. When he saw the calm and collected expression on Kevin's face, he couldn't help but say,
Kevin hasn't given up yet, and he hasn't failed either. It's still too early to judge the winner right now.
Dad, aren't you being too partial to that fool? Mr. Huxley has already concocted a two-colored pill. Do you think Kevin still has a chance to win? Gail looked with contempt at Kevin, who was still busy controlling the pill fire. Hubby, I think what Gail said makes sense. Even if we give Kevin a little more time, in the end he's going to fail anyway. Seeing that her husband wasn't going to say anything, Catherine could only wait patiently with him. All right, I guess we'll stay till the bitter end. Kevin glanced at Thornton and thought to himself, not many people can create a two-colored pill cloud. No wonder he's so proud of himself.
Kevin, just admit you've lost. You'll never be able to defeat me.
Thornton pushed the lid open and took out a red and orange pill. Mr. Huxley sure is awesome, Gail exclaimed as she excitedly ran towards him. Quickly, tell me what kind of pill you just made.
This is called the cosmetic pill. I specially refined it for Aunt Catherine.
Thornton brought Gail over to the stone table and explained to everyone. If someone takes this medicinal pill, their physical appearance will remain unchanged for 50 years. Dad, did you hear that? Mr. Huxley is so talented. Kevin should really kneel down and shine his shoes. Gail pretended to be powerful and said, You better let him know it would be better for him to quickly admit defeat. Suddenly, the clear blue sky suddenly became darker and darker. You could hear the thunder rumbling in the distance. It's already autumn. Why is there still thunder? Catherine looked up in confusion. It's pill thunder, Nadia declared as she stared at Kevin in admiration. Kevin had also attracted pill thunder during the competition in Chicago, but this looked even more powerful.
Nadia Alexander is talking about Kevin's.
Before Richard could finish what he was saying, a lightning bolt flashed in front of them. With unbelievable force, it struck the pill furnace right in front of Kevin. The purple gold bronze furnace instantly shattered into pieces, and the fist-sized ball of light was split into two by the lightning. Did he just create two pills at the same time in one furnace? Nadia Alexander said in shock as she dropped her coffee mug on the ground. This was more amazing than anything that she'd ever imagined. Thornton had managed to create a two-colored pill that he wanted to offer to Catherine Swinton. It was a cosmetic pill to help her keep her physical appearance for 50 years. It looked like Thornton was going to win the contest, but then Kevin impressed everyone by controlling the cauldron's flame with his hands, and then drawing lightning from the sky to strike his furnace. Bolts of lightning fell one after another, causing a commotion that shook all of St. Louis. "What's going on at the Swinton family's estate?" the locals wondered. Those who knew about herbalism knew that the pill lightning had been triggered while someone was creating a very high-grade herbal med. They wondered if someone from the Swinton family was responsible, but it was more likely that they'd invited an expert to their home. It seemed that everybody was watching the Swintons' home, wondering what was going on. Moments later, the onlookers who were standing in the courtyard quickly retreated about 200 feet away. The sound of thunder was so loud that their eardrums were beginning to hurt.
"Madam President, the pill thunder is incredibly powerful. Will my adopted son be all right?"
This was the first time that Richard Swinton had actually seen anything like this. He couldn't help but feel worried. "Don't worry, Mr. Swinton. The reason why the pill lightning has descended from the sky is because the quality of the pill is too great. Under normal circumstances, it won't cause any harm to the person who concocted the pill." Nadia's eyes revealed her concern. Even she had only attracted pill thunder once in her entire career. Thornton stared at the courtyard with his mouth agape. The whole place was completely filled with lightning. His entire body seemed to have become singed and bruised from the explosive energy. Gail's mouth was still hanging open. When she looked at the lightning, you could see the fear in her eyes. After a full 5 minutes, the pill lightning finally dispersed. Kevin took a deep breath and stepped back from the cauldron. He looked at the pills that were floating in the air and emitting a crystal clear light. A rich medicinal fragrance filled the air around them. "The pills are complete!" Nadia Alexander was the first to react as she excitedly waved her hands in the air. A large group of people slowly walked into the courtyard and saw Kevin holding not one, but 2 pills in his hand.
"Kevin, what kind of medicinal pills did you refine?"
Richard Swinton was a little excited and at a loss for what to do. "I made a face preservation pill and an invincibility pill," Kevin explained to them. "The silver-white pill can make people stay young forever. The yellow one can make people invincible for an hour. Nobody in the world could defeat you." Kevin's voice wasn't loud, but it resounded across the whole crowd. Either one of these 2 pills would be enough to crush Thornton's hopes of winning the competition. "It's kind of embarrassing, but I didn't bring any gifts from my foster parents when I first arrived here, so I had to use the materials on hand to make something for them." Kevin took the pills and handed them to Richard Swinton.
"You're a good son."
Richard Swinton's happiness couldn't be described with words. He turned around and handed the face preservation pill to his wife, Catherine.
"Honey, this is a pill that can make your beauty last forever."
Catherine had long forgotten about the horrible things she'd said to belittle Kevin. She took the pill and held it admiringly in her hands. Although physical training and normal herbal meds could help someone's looks to fade very slowly, it took a lot of energy to maintain. And who wouldn't want to look youthful for their entire life? With this gift, Catherine's love for Kevin increased exponentially. Just then, Nadia Alexander suddenly spoke up and said, "Kevin, are you interested in joining the Herbalist Society? With your skill in herbalism and my highest recommendation, you could definitely become an elder." When she said this, the whole place fell silent. To be an elder in the Herbalist Society meant you were practically a national treasure. It was the highest status you could hope for. Thornton clenched his fists, even though he had to concede the enormous gap in abilities between him and Kevin. However, Nadia Alexander's offer to Kevin made him extremely jealous. More importantly, now he would never have a chance to marry Brenda. After thinking for a moment, Kevin waved his hand as if to say that he was declining her offer. "Forget it. I'm too lazy to let myself be controlled by a lot of rules and regulations." "Don't be in such a hurry to turn this down. Think about it first. Anyway, I've already given you the details. You can tell me your decision after you've had some time to think it through," Nadia hurriedly said. "Yes, Why don't we talk about it again in the future?" Kevin didn't reject her completely this time. He wanted to take some time to think about the possibilities. Although the conversation between the two of them was simple, it stirred up a lot of emotions in everyone's hearts. Of course, Nadia's terms sounded very enticing. As long as Kevin went along with the deal, the Herbalist Society would draw the most benefit from it. If they could get Kevin, who could refine a supreme-grade pill to join their side, the overall strength of the Herbalist Society would increase enormously. "Thornton and Gale, don't forget about the deal we agreed to." Kevin looked at the two of them with a big smile on his face. "No, I don't want to wash your feet." Gale's eyes instantly turned red. She backed away from him and started to cry. Catherine and Brenda were so scared that they hurriedly started to walk away. Imagine a dignified member of the Swinton family washing the feet of some common man. If news of this got out, how would Gale ever show her face in St. Louis again? Thornton's expression also became extremely dejected. "About that bet, Mr. Williams, I suddenly remembered that there are still some matters for me to attend to at home. I can't stay and play with you right now. Let's have lunch one of these days." While he was saying this, he wanted to turn around and run away, but he was stopped by Richard Swinton. "A man is only as good as his word. If you take away his money and his power, that's all you have left. Thornton, as the future leader of the Huxley family, how can you go back on your word?" Richard Swinton reminded him with a very serious expression on his face. "But I was just joking with Mr. Williams. Didn't you know that?" Thornton replied as he began to get very flustered. Richard was a good friend of Thornton's father, and because of his seniority, Thornton had to treat him with the utmost respect. Nadia Alexander stood there without saying a word. In the martial arts world, words were the most important. As her direct student, Thornton absolutely needed to keep his promise. "Thornton, turn around and come back here," Kevin suddenly called out to him. "What are you doing? Oh!" Thornton had just turned around and opened his mouth when Kevin tossed some herbal pills down his throat. Thornton coughed as he tried to spit them out. "What did you just give me?" "Don't worry, Thornton. It's just a bone toughening pill. It's no big deal," Kevin answered casually. "Damn it, hurry up! Give me the antidote!" Thornton kept coughing. He was so scared that he almost peed his pants. He even tried reaching into his own mouth, but it was too late. He'd swallowed all the bone toughening pills. "As long as you keep your promise and stay by my side as my personal assistant for 3 years, everything will be fine. I'll also regularly give you the antidote." Kevin put his hands in his pockets as he smirked at Thornton. Kevin realized that the reason why he'd been bullied and looked down upon by everyone was because he didn't have a tough enough reputation. That was why he followed Mitchell Cook and the others to adopt a business strategy. He wanted to accumulate more wealth and build a foundation for his future plans. Thornton's herbalism skills weren't bad, but he was a bit of a playboy. As long as he could be trained, Kevin would definitely be able to use him in the future. "Kevin, stop playing around," Nadia couldn't help but warn him. After all, the Huxley family wasn't to be taken lightly. "Why don't you take a good look at yourself? Do you think you're worthy to have someone like Thornton as your personal assistant?" Gale stopped crying and glared at Kevin contemptuously. "Even if I don't take him on as my helper, you still have to wash my feet for me tonight," Kevin replied as he looked her in the eyes. This time, Gale burst into tears again. "Actually, Thornton, you can totally be at ease and walk around as much as you want. The bone toughening pill will only take effect in a couple of days." Kevin smilingly waved his hand at him and added, "I hope you enjoy it." "Kevin, you're so wicked." Thornton was so angry that he flew into a rage. This kind of treatment was unheard of. But it would be better to wait on Kevin hand and foot than to lose his life, wouldn't it? He really didn't want to die, so it looked like he'd have to be Kevin's gopher for the next 3 years. If his father found out about this, he would definitely break both of Kevin's legs. So what if I'm wicked? Anyway, I'm not the one who took the bone toughening pill. Kevin laughed and looked up at the sky. Thornton was so angry that he actually hyperventilated and passed out. "Thornton!" Nadia quickly pulled an herbal med out of her pocket and gave it to him. She picked him up off the ground and quickly carried him off to take him to the Huxley family's mansion. This was a matter of great importance, and even though she was his mentor, the decision wasn't up to her. She needed Thornton's father to decide. The corner of Richard's mouth twitched when he saw how thick-skinned Kevin was. However, nobody could do anything about the situation. After all, it was Thornton who had brought this on himself with all of his boasting. Once things had calmed down, Richard Swinton took Kevin out to find some new clothes. Meanwhile, Catherine and Brenda stayed home to comfort Gail. The afternoon passed by in a hurry. That night, a luxurious mansion in St. Louis was brightly lit. This was the Huxley family's chief residence. In the main hall, a middle-aged man sat at the place of honor. His face was resolute, projecting a certain quiet dignity. He was Virgil Huxley, the head of the entire Huxley family. The upper echelons of the Huxley family were also sitting in the hall. Thornton knelt on the floor like a child who had behaved badly. He lowered his head and didn't dare to look up at his father. Nadia Alexander sat down and told Virgil everything that had just happened at the Swinton family's estate. An herbalist in his 20s had concocted a supreme pill using lightning bolts. This was truly an unbelievable thing. However, she was telling the truth. Everyone in St. Louis had seen this with their own eyes.
Nadia Alexander, you're one of the senior members of the Herbalist Society. Do you really think this young man called Kevin has a higher skill in herbalism than you?
Virgil Huxley flipped through the documents he was holding in his hand. The Huxley family was so powerful and well-connected that they'd been able to investigate everything related to Kevin in a single afternoon. Their research unearthed every detail about him, even his favorite flavor of ice cream when he was 6 years old. They didn't overlook anything, no matter how trivial it seemed. So Virgil Huxley was especially interested in how Kevin had been kicked out of his family and become a useless son-in-law of a smaller Chicago family. "Mr. Huxley, I only have one thing to say to you. Kevin is absolutely not an ordinary person. Even the Herbalist Society would be too limiting of a place for him. He actually refused my offer of membership," Nadia said with a sigh. How would Virgil Huxley handle this delicate situation? At the Huxley family residence, Nadia Alexander had just told Virgil Huxley about the herbalism skills battle between Kevin and Thornton. Taking an interest in Kevin, Virgil had conducted an extensive background check on him. He couldn't believe that Kevin had handily defeated his son and that his herbalism skills were much greater, even compared to Nadia's own abilities. Nadia then told him that Kevin had refused her offer to join the Herbalist Society, suggesting that it was perhaps because it would have been too limiting for him. Virgil Huxley frowned deeply. The only kinds of people who would reject the Herbalist Society were either too arrogant for their own good or too ignorant and indifferent to the fame and fortune it brought. After careful consideration, Virgil took a deep breath and turned to Thornton.
"Son, you must honor the terms of your agreement. So go find Kevin tomorrow and do as he says. For our family's sake, I hope you can learn to keep a low profile during this period of time."
Both the Huxley family and Nadia Alexander were shocked at this decision. Thornton was the future leader of their family. How could his father let him become Kevin's personal assistant? However, they naturally didn't dare to oppose the decision of the family patriarch.
"Yes, Dad,"
Thornton begrudgingly complied as he gritted his teeth. Kevin, who was currently staying in the Swinton family mansion, was lying on his bed. He then called Lily to let her know that he might not be coming home for the next few days, so she should stay put and be careful, especially since she was just all by herself. After hanging up the phone, Kevin looked at the ceiling in a daze. He kept thinking about his plans for establishing his empire, from the money down to the people that it would involve. Among the people of the Myriads and the Alliance, only Spencer and Derek were loyal to him. If they could recruit others with high-strength bases, then it would surely help him carry out his plans. Given this, Kevin suddenly remembered something. When he had the Hill family destroyed, Craig Hill's 5 adopted children had been captured by his men. Kevin quickly dialed a number. "Spencer, let me ask you something. What's the current situation with the Hill family's 5 children?" "Enforcer, after we captured the 5 children, they were given a special medicine that was made by the Myriads to prevent them from using their strength to escape. As of now, they're still being held by our men as we wait for further instructions," Spencer reported respectfully. "That's good. And how are things over there in Detroit right now?" Kevin asked excitedly. "Since eliminating the Hill family, we've stopped all their illegal activities. We've also set up many companies and factories to keep all their workers employed. Now the people of Detroit love us very much. And by controlling almost 70% of the city, I'm sure all of the other families must either fear or respect us," Spencer briefly explained the situation. Kevin was extremely happy when he heard this. Almost the entire city of Detroit had already become his property. As he thought about it, he slowly closed his eyes and had a good night's sleep. The next morning, with suitcase in hand, Thornton went to the Swinton family's residence to find Kevin. "Thornton, you're here so early," Kevin said with a faint smile while holding a bowl of cereal. "It's not that early anymore," Thornton humbly stammered. Last night, after everyone else left, no one would have known that Virgil had beaten some sense into him because of the embarrassment that he caused. This was because when it was over, he was given a medicinal pill that healed all his bruises overnight, making it look like nothing had happened to him. "Mr. Huxley, don't talk to this country bumpkin. You haven't eaten yet, have you? Let me ask someone to get you a bowl of cereal right away." Gail glared at Kevin fiercely. Both Richard and Catherine Swinton went out early in the morning while Brenda hadn't woken up yet, leaving Gail to eat breakfast with just Kevin until Thornton arrived. "It's okay, I already had breakfast at home." Thornton still had a depressed look on his face. That morning, Virgil personally cooked him some eggs and bacon. However, he intentionally burnt them, then forced his son to eat them. That made Thornton feel really uncomfortable about the thought of eating anything else. The smell of food alone would make him want to puke. "Thornton, it seems like you're very punctual. I didn't even rush you since it's your first day," Kevin said with a smile. "But don't worry, just follow my orders and I promise that your life will be very colorful." "As long as you don't cheat me, it's better than anything," Thornton softly uttered. As he thought about his life over the next 3 years, he didn't know how he would ever survive it. "Country bumpkin, let me tell you, if you dare to bully Mr. Huxley, I won't let you get away with it." Gail tightly clenched her fist as she held her spoon in front of Kevin. "Is that so? I think you should worry about yourself first. When I'm in a good mood one of these days, I'll come back here to make you wash my feet." Kevin didn't take her threat seriously at all. After tidying up his clothes, he told Gail with a smile, "Sis, please tell our father that I'm taking Thornton back to Chicago with me. I'll come back to visit him when I have some time." "You better not come back here ever again." Gail looked at him with disgust. Even if Richard treated Kevin like his own son, she felt that his status in the Swinton family was beneath her. Gail then turned her attention back to Thornton. "Mr. Huxley, you must take good care of yourself in Chicago. If you have time, please call or visit us, preferably without that country bumpkin." Thornton nodded bitterly and followed Kevin out of the Swinton residence. "Thornton, this must be the first time you've left St. Louis in so long. How much money did you bring with you?" Kevin asked with a smile on his face. "Why? What do you want?" Thornton looked at Kevin's face and suddenly felt some inexplicable panic in his heart. "Don't be scared. I'm just worried about you. Chicago is more expensive and has more brutal winters than St. Louis. And without your father's support, I won't be able to explain to him why you got so thin and frail when he sees you again. Plus, we'll be dropping by Detroit first. While we're on the same side now, I don't want to have to take care of you," Kevin replied with a smile on his face. Although Kevin had never met the patriarch of the Huxley family before, he had a very good impression of Virgil Huxley. Because he wanted his son to keep his word, Kevin had to admit that he was a good and honorable father. "Don't worry about me. Before I left, my mom gave me a credit card to use." Thornton covered his mouth as soon as he finished speaking. Kevin just nodded and didn't say anything else. They then took a taxi to the airport and booked 2 tickets to Detroit. In order to take the first step for his organization, Kevin needed the 5 Hill children, and he had to do it today before something unexpected happened to him again. Just before noon, as soon as the 2 of them had landed in Detroit and left the airport, they saw Spencer and dozens of men waiting for them in front of a row of expensive luxury cars. "Greetings, Mr. Williams. Welcome to Detroit," everyone respectfully said in a loud voice. Before their flight had taken off earlier, Kevin sent a text telling Spencer not to address him as enforcer upon his arrival. After all, Thornton wasn't a member of the Myriad, so it wasn't necessarily a good thing to let him know too much about that. "Don't be so formal." Kevin waved his hand and pointed at Thornton. "Let me introduce this young man to everyone. He's the future leader of the Huxley family in St. Louis. You can just call him Thornton from now on." "Yes, Mr. Williams." Spencer and the others nodded in understanding once again. Seeing this, Thornton looked at Kevin in surprise and thought to himself, "Isn't he just a useless son-in-law from Chicago? Why does he have such a powerful force in Detroit?" More than 10 luxury cars left the airport quickly under the shocked gazes of the pedestrians. From there, it took them nearly half an hour to reach the Hill family's mansion. When Thornton got out of the car, he was so scared that he almost fell over. Looking around, he saw hundreds of men in black standing both in and out of the mansion. Each of them were emanating a strong and vicious aura. Fortunately, he only had a little bit of cold sweat on his forehead, so he quickly brushed it off as if this was unsurprising to him. While on the plane, Thornton thought that Kevin wouldn't treat him badly, knowing that he was the future leader of the Huxley family. Perhaps he would even be shown some compassion along the way. However, the situation in front of him had suddenly shattered all of those hopes. With his safety and well-being not guaranteed, he immediately began to regret what he had gotten himself into. "Luckily, I didn't offend Kevin on the way here. Otherwise, all of these men would have definitely killed me by now. If I want to stay alive, I'd better be on my best behavior from now on," Thornton thought bitterly to himself. "You guys can go and rest first. That includes you, Thornton," Kevin ordered indifferently. "Hey, Kevin, Mr. Williams, I'm actually not that tired." Thornton didn't dare to stay too far away from Kevin. With just one look, he could tell that these men weren't friendly people. If he accidentally did something wrong, he would die in the blink of an eye. "While my family is very prominent back home, this city is within Kevin's sphere of influence, not St. Louis. A man should know when to yield in the face of danger. Anyway, Kevin is probably just trying to show off. He wouldn't really dare to do anything to me, would he?" Thornton kept comforting himself with this thought. "Don't worry. They're all good people. Don't be too nervous. It's no different than arriving at your own home." Kevin patted his shoulder and quickly followed Spencer in a different direction. Seeing this, Thornton immediately became anxious and wanted to follow. "Mr. Williams," but before he could continue, he was already stopped by a few of Kevin's men. "Thornton, please rest in your room first. Please cooperate with us. Don't make it too difficult for either of us," a man in black said to him coldly. "All right, got it." Thornton nodded with difficulty. At the moment, he felt like crying. Why was Kevin so frighteningly powerful? Had he known this earlier, he wouldn't have looked down on Kevin like that yesterday and bet with him during the pill-making contest. In light of this new information, even if Kevin were to set him free in 3 years' time, he would never be willing to leave his side. From this moment on, Thornton had already decided in his heart that Kevin was his boss. Once they arrived at the Hill family mansion, Thornton was frightened after seeing hundreds of men in black surrounding them. As Kevin left him to follow Spencer, Thornton quickly realized how powerful Kevin was. Being in Kevin's sphere of influence, Thornton decided to treat Kevin as his boss from then on, not wanting to leave his side even after 3 years' time. The 5 Hill children had been locked up in an underground cellar that the Hill family had previously used to imprison their business rivals. It just proved that their family had no respect for the law, but now the tables had turned, with Craig's adopted children being the ones held against their will there. When Spencer took Kevin to the cellar, he immediately felt a strong presence inside. However, when the door was opened, he was a little surprised to see the 5 children looking as if they hadn't eaten for many days. Moreover, the aura emanating from their bodies was extremely weak from the medicinal pill that Spencer had given them. What Kevin didn't know was that since the 5 of them were caught, they were only given some soup and water to drink for 3 meals a day. Plus, given that they couldn't use their energy to protect themselves, they drastically lost weight. "You guys are too cruel," Kevin sighed softly. Upon hearing this, the corner of Spencer's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, "Are we as cruel as you? How did you treat Nolan Hill back then? Enforcer, you're truly a ruthless man. We're nothing compared to you." No one would have thought that the 5 young members of the Hill family who used to be in high spirits were now tied up on the ground like prisoners waiting for their death. However, when they saw Kevin, their faces immediately became agitated and their eyes were filled with hatred. Even if he'd never met any of them, it seemed that Nolan Hill had shown them pictures of Kevin before. "How much do you guys hate me? You're all already so weak, yet you still want to fight me to the death?" Kevin teased them as he frowned. "Kevin, if you have the guts, let us go. When we recover, we'll fight you to the death fair and square. Fight us like a real man." Although Dylan Hill had almost run out of energy, he still managed to use his remaining strength to show a fierce expression. "Kevin, you're such a powerful man. Is there any point in torturing us like this? Why don't you just give me a quick death? Otherwise, we'll make you pay as soon as we get out of here." Although Sarah Hill's voice wasn't loud, her eyes were filled with determination. Kevin didn't pay attention to their words and allowed them to continue berating him. After all, a few insults wouldn't injure him in any way. Besides, he was here to recruit them today, so he didn't mind if they vented their resentment now as long as he could get them to obediently follow him in the future. After the 5 siblings had used up all of their remaining strength in their bodies, Kevin's face gradually became serious. "I know that you're still bitter about how I destroyed the Hill family, but let me ask you all a question. Didn't your family deserve it? Just based on the things that the Hill family had done, like kidnapping to threaten their opponents in the business world, bullying countless men and harming innocent women in the process. Even if I hadn't done anything, I'm sure that someone else would inevitably have destroyed the Hill family one day. It just so happened that I was the first one to do it," Kevin said firmly. "The 5 of you are Nolan's trusted aides. You should know very well that what I said is true. So if I were given another chance, I would do it again." The entire cellar fell into silence as the 5 siblings lowered their heads in shame. In their hearts, they knew that what Kevin said was true. Until Kevin, why didn't the Hill family seem like they had any opponents in Detroit? In truth, their actions were so ruthless that it made many people want to skin them alive and tear their bones apart. Some even wanted to dig out the graves of departed Hill family members just to spit on them. However, all these people had been enduring their frustrations patiently because they weren't a match for the Hill family. And it was only Kevin who managed to stand up to them and eliminate their stranglehold on Detroit for good. "Why aren't you saying anything? Weren't you shouting out loud at me just now?" Kevin glanced at them and said. "I won't say anything about the others, but I know that the 5 of you are quite powerful at full strength. Given that, I'm sure you've done a lot of shady things for the Hill family in the past, haven't you? Do you know why you're still alive today?" Kevin asked them. "It's because I want to give you all a chance to turn over a new leaf. If you choose to follow me, we shall do things that will benefit people." As soon as they heard this, Dylan, Sarah, Julia, Cameron, and Isaiah all finally understood. It seemed that Kevin had only said these words because he wanted to take the 5 of them under his wing and carry out his self-righteous plans. "Kevin, you're being delusional. Who do you think you are? We'll never follow you." Dylan stared at him and growled at him as he gritted his teeth. "What's the use of saying so much nonsense? Kevin, you're wasting your time. If you really want to help us, just give us a quick death so that we can meet our Father in the afterlife as soon as possible," Julia muttered while gasping for breath. Kevin had already guessed that they were going to react this way. After all, he knew that each one of them would be a tough nut to crack. However, he wasn't interested in subduing them by force. Instead, he had a much easier solution for dealing with them. "All right, since you don't have any intention of joining me, I won't keep you here any longer." Kevin turned around and instructed Spencer, "Go out and prepare a table of good wine and delicious food. Also find a few doctors to take a proper look at their health." "Yes, Enforcer." Although Spencer didn't understand exactly what Kevin had in mind, he didn't dare to bite the bullet and ask him. After that, Kevin crouched down in front of the 5 siblings and used the night dagger to cut off all of the ropes that were wrapped around them. He then took out 5 recharge pills from his pocket. These are recharge pills, which I've personally refined recently. It can restore your physical strength in just 2 minutes, thereby removing the effects of the medicinal pill that was previously given to you. After Kevin stuffed the pills into Dylan's hands, he turned around and walked outside. "If you don't want to follow me, that's fine, but I don't want to keep you locked up in this small cellar any longer. Go outside and have a good meal. When you're done, go ahead and leave this place and go on with your lives. Don't come back to Detroit ever again." "Do you really want to let us go?" Cameron was surprised. "How can we be so sure that those pills aren't poisonous?" Isaiah questioned with some hesitancy. Hearing this, Kevin stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around and revealed a smile on his face. "All of you must understand one thing. If I wanted to kill all of you, it would have been a piece of cake. But I've always cherished special talents, and seeing how all of you would rather die than align yourselves with me, I simply can't bear that. It would be too much of a waste to kill all of you. After taking the pill, you should leave as soon as possible. As long as you don't cause me any trouble in the future, then I'll happily let all of you go." Kevin looked especially regretful. The 5 siblings looked at each other and couldn't help but feel conflicted. Their hearts weren't inherently bad. It was just that Nolan Hill had nurtured them throughout the years and spent a lot of effort to get their strength levels to where they were. But to be honest, they really couldn't find a reason to hate Kevin. It's not like the Hill family had only become notorious in the last day or two. And if it weren't for their loyalty towards Nolan and Craig, they knew deep down that they would rather not continue going down the same path as them. Seeing that the 5 siblings didn't make a move on him, Kevin felt slightly relieved. Maybe there was still a chance to convince them to join his side. Although he looked as steady as a rock, Kevin was actually panicking inside. He was afraid that these people would just take the recharge pills and leave. If that happened, not only would he fail to recruit anyone, he would also lose 5 valuable herbal pills. That would be a double loss. Dylan had almost recovered his strength after taking the recharge pill. After thinking about it for more than 10 minutes, he raised his head and looked at Kevin. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. What is it?" Kevin eagerly stood with his hands behind his back. Dylan carefully chose his words. "You said earlier that you would give us a chance to turn over a new leaf. I wonder what we can do with you. Since you've asked so kindly, I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. I plan to bring real change into this world by recruiting people and building my own organization," Kevin declared loudly. "My mission is to uphold justice by eliminating evil and spreading good." The 5 siblings were deeply inspired by Kevin's passionate words. How could they not be moved by something like this? Things were looking up for Kevin's plan. Conflicted by Kevin's sudden act of kindness and their loyalty to the Hill family, the 5 adopted Hill siblings knew deep down that they didn't want to continue going down the same path as Nolan and Craig. And when Dylan asked Kevin about his plans if they were to join him, they were all moved by his impassioned words about building his own organization to uphold justice by eliminating evil and spreading good. Kevin's mission went beyond increasing a company's resources and funds. However, creating an organization required strength, the courage to fight with other groups head-on, as well as the determination to not be bullied by their opponents. Fortunately, the 5 siblings were all experts who were used to this sort of thing. It was only a matter of choosing which side they wanted to be on. "I'd like to ask you something. Currently, almost all of the major groups are aligned with each other. Furthermore, they have many years of deep history, and the members they've recruited and trained are all powerful fighters." Dylan paused for a second and looked at Kevin. When he saw there was no change in Kevin's facial expression, Dylan continued, "Since you want to establish your own organization, what makes yours different from theirs? Isn't everyone else supposedly fighting to spread good and eliminate evil too? Moreover, even if you can recruit people like us, what method would you use to make your members stronger?" The other 4 siblings frowned thoughtfully as they began to think about the meaning behind their brother's words. Kevin was impressed by this and gave Dylan a look of approval. He had to admit that the man was very smart. He wasn't just someone who only knew how to fight with reckless abandon, and only those who knew how to think for themselves could be trained to become great. Because of this, Kevin's desire to recruit them became even stronger. "You're right, but there are also a few aspects that you haven't considered. Do you think that those other groups are truly righteous? When you look at power such as the 10 grade schools, aren't their leaders just searching for more power and status?" Kevin replied with a faint smile. "As for how I'll help you become stronger, you don't have to worry about that at all." Before the 5 siblings could even ask what he meant, they saw him bring out 10 herbal pills from his pocket. "Is that?" Dylan's eyes widened. "That isn't a power pill, is it?" Julia asked in shock. The other 3 siblings gulped in surprise. Who would have thought that Kevin would have so many of the coveted power pills right in his pocket? Wealthy buyers were snatching them up like crazy. "You guessed right. These are indeed power pills, and they're worth billions. And these aren't the only ones that I have in stock." Kevin handed the pills to Dylan and said, "Take them. My men have been neglecting you, so take this as compensation." The 5 siblings were completely at a loss for words for a moment. How could the ordinary-looking Kevin be so rich and powerful? With the destruction of the Hill family, they had become Kevin's prisoners. And without enough strength to fight back, they thought that their lives would be over. But now their luck had changed. Not only was no one in trouble, but they had also gotten access to the power pill. Even when the Hill family was still around, it was impossible for them to spend so much money to get medicinal pills like this. After all, the 5 of them were only adopted children, and it was Nolan who was Craig's biological son. So although their lives looked glorious on the surface, they weren't treated much differently from the dogs that the Hill family raised. "Hurry up and take it. What are you waiting for? I hope these pills can be of some help to you," Kevin casually encouraged them. Although the power pill was already useless for someone at Kevin's strength level, he knew that in the case of the 5 siblings, these could offer the opportunity for them to break through. After pondering for a while, Dylan suddenly took 2 steps back and sincerely knelt on the ground before Kevin. He said respectfully, "From today onwards, Mr. Williams, you have my loyalty. I'll definitely do anything for you in the future, Master." Sarah and the others also knelt down. "We will also follow you to the end of our lives, Master. We'll be at your service to help you fulfill your plans." "I'm glad to hear that," Kevin exclaimed as he reached out his hand to help them up from the ground. This was a solid step for his organization. After helping them up, Kevin advised them, "You must take your power pills as soon as possible and strive to break through the next stage of your development. I'll entrust you with a heavy responsibility in the future." "We won't let you down, Master," the 5 siblings answered in unison. Kevin nodded his head in acknowledgement. As long as he could nurture their talents, he wouldn't be stingy at all about giving them all the power pills they needed. Anyway, the raw materials were very simple to procure and refine for him. "By the way, you don't need to call me Master anymore. Just call me Chancellor, because our organization will be called the Radiance," Kevin revealed. "The Radiance? May I ask why you chose this name, Chancellor?" Dylan asked curiously. "In order to punish evil and promote good, we must eliminate the darkness of this world. As such, the Radiance aims to be the light that will restore all hope to mankind," Kevin replied slowly. "Well said, Chancellor." The 5 siblings didn't ask any more questions. An hour later, news of the Radiance establishment had spread across the entire Midwest. Everyone was shocked, especially some of the senior powers. This was because the new organization had provided its recruits with excellent benefits. Ordinary people who joined would immediately be rewarded with 1 power pill, while those with higher levels of strength would either be given 2 power pills, 1 spark pill, or 1 immortal ascension pill, depending on their stage of development. The last 2 medicinal pills in particular were considered legendary items. Nearly 90% of herbalists and medicinal pill users had only heard of them but had never seen them before. The Spark Pill and Immortal Ascension Pill were said to be 10 and 100 times more effective than a power pill, respectively. At an undisclosed location inside the office on the 13th floor of a huge building, a middle-aged man was sitting with a gloomy look on his face. He was surrounded by his subordinates who also looked dejected. The organization that had suffered the greatest impact from this news was undoubtedly the Herbalist Society. Their entire foundation was built around their expertise in concocting pills, which gave them the confidence to be superior. But now, an organization that wanted to steal their line of expertise had suddenly emerged from out of nowhere. How could they remain calm?
"Has anyone found out the origin of the Radiance? Who is the man behind this?"
the middle-aged man asked with furrowed brows. After a full minute, the office remained silent as no one spoke up to answer him.
"Are you all deaf or mute?"
The man spoke again. His voice was now filled with anger. After another 10 seconds, an old man took a step forward, trembling. He lowered his head and replied, "Chairman, our people weren't able to find any background information about the Radiance." Suddenly, a loud sound was heard across the office. The Herbalist Society's chairman had thrown the glass of whiskey that he was drinking and had shattered into pieces in front of the old man who had just spoken.
"Why are we still keeping the Midwest branch then? It seems that they're all useless pieces of trash that can't do their job well. Did the Radiance just pop out of thin air or something?"
The chairman reprimanded him coldly. Again, no one in the office dared to answer him. After scanning the crowd, the chairman continued,
"Collect everything that you can gather about the Radiance within 3 days. Otherwise, everyone in the Midwest branch must answer to me."
"Yes, Chairman." Everyone gritted their teeth and answered. At the same time, in the Central Alternative Healing Academy, Paul Vaughn frowned and pondered the same question. Normally, the establishment of a new organization wouldn't attract the 10 grade school's attention. However, the problem was that the Radiance had shown their true strength, and as a legitimate threat, they couldn't afford to ignore it.
"We haven't even obtained Kevin's power pill recipe, and now a new organization called the Radiance can produce better pills?"
Paul Vaughn was unsettled by this as he tapped his fingers on the table.
"Right now, we know nothing about the Radiance, so we don't know how to deal with them," Jeffrey Bowie added.
"Even without considering whether the nature of the Radiance is good or bad, just from their medicinal pills alone, it'll have a grave impact on our future plans,"
Wayne Ford admitted. If the Radiance was able to produce these 3 pills at once, who could guarantee that they didn't have any other pills in their hands? And if everyone wanted to obtain these pills, would anyone still join the 10 great schools in the future? Paul Vaughn suddenly stood up and his eyes were burning with intent. We must find out everything about them within 2 days. We can't let the Radiants become the next herbalist society. The next 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. By then, news of the Radiants had spread across the entire world. Just as the major powers had expected, under the huge temptation of benefits, at least 6,000 recruits had rushed over to the Radiants' headquarters. Every organization, including the Herbalist Society, had thoroughly investigated the Radiants. However, they only knew that the Chancellor's name was Kenneth Wilkinson, and almost no one had heard of him or how strong he was. Moreover, he lived in seclusion without staying in one place for long. And the few people who had caught a glimpse of him said that he wore a mysterious white mask on his face that concealed his true appearance in public. However, this didn't stop him from becoming the most talked about person at the moment. Meanwhile, in the Midwest, a secret base that was previously abandoned by the Myriads had now been transformed into an impenetrable fortress under the command of Kenneth Wilkinson, which was Kevin's pseudonym. This served as the official headquarters of the Radiants. How many members do we have now? Kevin rubbed his forehead and asked. There was a white mask lying on the table in front of him. So far, over 16,000 people have joined the Radiants. Among them, there are about 8,000 level 1, 4,000 level 2, and fewer than 1,000 level 3 and level 4 experts. The rest of them are all ordinary people who have yet to formally begin their strength and martial arts training, Spencer answered respectfully. This response was already considered pretty good for a new organization. However, Kevin was still disappointed for not being able to recruit a single person who was at least a level 5 expert. He sighed a little, but he had to move on to other matters for now. How long until the Hayes family wedding in Detroit? A trace of coldness flashed in Kevin's eyes as he asked. He'd been busy concocting pills day and night over the past few days for the Radiants and had almost forgotten about it. The wedding will be tomorrow at noon, Chancellor, Spencer replied concisely. According to your instructions, we've already made arrangements in Detroit. The Hayes family has been colluding with the Hill family for several years. They've done a lot of shady business together. This time we'll use their downfall to establish ourselves. Kevin slowly stood up and looked at the sky outside the window. Go now and keep recruiting. I won't allow any mistakes. Yes, Chancellor. Spencer lowered his head, then quickly turned around and left the room. Phoebe, don't worry. I'll save you tomorrow. Kevin thought to himself as he seethed with anger. I'll make the Hayes family suffer even worse than the Hill family.
Just then, Dylan walked into the room. He lowered his head respectfully to Kevin and looked at him gratefully. Because of the pills Kevin had provided, the 5 siblings had finally broken through the bottleneck of their strength training. Now they were only a step away from becoming level 5 experts, which was something that they didn't even dare to think about as a possibility in the past. So they were feeling very grateful towards him. What's the matter, Dylan? Kevin asked without turning his head. Only then did Dylan remember what he had entered the room for. Chancellor, I don't know what happened to Thornton. He's been refusing to eat and drink for the past few days. Moreover, he's been complaining how he hasn't been able to sleep at night. He's currently throwing a fit and demanding to see you. Thornton wants to see me? Kevin asked in surprise. Yes, Chancellor. Thornton muttered that you sold him out. Dylan didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he replied. Kevin suddenly remembered something. Ever since he brought Thornton with him from St. Louis, he'd been busy concocting pills for the Radiants, and he had never seen him once. All right, let's go to him then. Kevin turned around and walked out with Dylan. At that very moment, inside one of the rooms of the Radiant's headquarters, Thornton suddenly slapped his food away from the table, sending it to the floor as the plate shattered into pieces. I already told you,
I'm not eating until Kevin comes here. Tell him to see me immediately." Thornton was so angry that he kicked his chair over onto the floor. Around him, 5 or 6 staff members were unsure of what to do. Because Kevin's identity had to be highly confidential, almost everyone in the Radiants only knew him as the Chancellor, Kenneth Wilkinson. They had never heard of anyone named Kevin before. "All of you, get the hell out of here. If Kevin doesn't come to see me in a day, then I'll either starve to death, die of thirst, or jump out a window." Thornton was absolutely furious. When he was still living in the Huxley family mansion back in St. Louis, Thornton was treated like the dignified future leader of their family. However, since following Kevin out to Detroit, he'd been ignored for days. Thornton had heard about stories like this before. Some bad guys were responsible for selling innocent people to wealthy buyers, sending them into undisclosed locations to become their servants and living a life that was worse than a pig's. Could he have been a victim of human trafficking or something? He never expected Kevin to be such a wicked and evil person. Because of this, Thornton had begun to have delusions about a situation. He believed that the food being served to him had been drugged, and he was fortunately smart enough to realize what was happening around him. Otherwise, what would happen if he ended up enslaved? He refused to be a victim. Suddenly, the door of the room was opened from the outside. "I already said that I won't eat anything. It's useless no matter who tries to persuade me. If you're afraid that I'll starve to death, ask Kevin to come and see me immediately," Thornton said angrily without turning his head. He was in for quite a surprise. "I'm not afraid about you starving to death because I know the food here's really good." Kevin looked at the mess in the room and didn't understand why Thornton was refusing to eat. Thornton was stunned for a moment before he turned around and immediately hugged Kevin. On the verge of tears, it was as if he'd been reunited with his own family. "What are you doing? I heard you haven't had anything to eat or drink for the past few days. Is it because you're not used to living here or something?" Kevin asked Thornton. He then motioned to Dylan, signaling him to wait outside. "Since we arrived here in Detroit, you never came back to see me. Did you drag me all the way here just to sell me into slavery?" Thornton roared. "I don't care about our deal anymore. I have to go back to St. Louis right now." Thornton looked calm on the surface, but in fact he was panicking deep inside, especially when he saw that everyone was smiling at him in a way that he couldn't understand. He had initially thought of escaping from the place. However, he found that although the road outside was very clear, he would get lost soon enough and eventually Dylan would catch him again. "We can't go back to St. Louis at the moment. The earliest that I can do that is in 2 days," Kevin answered somewhat awkwardly. Since Thornton had followed him out here, it would be hard to explain to the Huxley family if something were to happen to him. However, the wedding of the Hayes family was imminent, and Kevin had already decided that he would go to Detroit that very afternoon. "All right, but if you're going somewhere, take me with you this time. I don't trust any of these people." Thornton had the urge to cry when he thought about being left alone again. "All right, then let's leave immediately." Kevin didn't want to delay his plans any further. In any case, the everyday matters of the Radiants were under the supervision of Dylan, Sarah, Julia, Cameron, and Isaiah Hill. Meanwhile, Spencer and Derek were in charge of handling the more significant decisions. There was no need for Kevin to worry about them in his absence. With that, Kevin gave Dylan some instructions and arranged a specific time for the following day's operation. After that, he left the Radiant's headquarters with Thornton. Now that his organization had been established, its expansion would have to depend on the development of the current recruitment situation, as well as the management of his trusted people. Inside the main office of the Herbalist Society's headquarters, Nadia Alexander was kneeling on one knee with her head lowered before the chairman. It had been more than a few days since his order was sent, but until now the Midwest branch had yet to obtain any useful background information regarding the Radiants. In order to save her junior and senior members' lives, Nadia had no choice but to personally return to the headquarters and humbly apologize on their behalf.
"Nadia, you've really disappointed me this time. The Midwest branch has been established for almost 30 years. With all of your resources and experience, why can't you give me any information yet about this new organization?"
The chairman asked her coldly as he sat in his big throne-like armchair. "My apologies, Chairman. It's not that we're incompetent, but the whereabouts of the Radiants is simply too well hidden. Their organization seems to have spread out into multiple branches as well, and all of them are in undisclosed locations. We've searched everywhere, but it's really difficult to find them." As Nadia said this, beads of sweat kept dripping down from her forehead.
"They've already have different branches set up?"
A trace of surprise flashed across the chairman's eyes.
"It seems that whoever started this organization is indeed a talented individual who can't be underestimated. But did he really want to challenge the authority of the Herbalist Society?"
No one dared to answer the chairman's question, whether it was the Power Pill, the Spark Pill, or the Immortal Ascension Pill that the Radiants offered. Nobody in the Herbalist Society was able to create them. After a very long silence, an old man suddenly stepped forward and bowed his head. Then he slowly uttered, "Chairman, I have an idea that can perhaps draw out the Radiants as Chancellor."
"If you have something to say, tell me quickly. Stop beating around the bush,"
the chairman urged him impatiently. "As you all know, in a month's time, the Herbalist Society will be holding a pill-gathering battle," the old man said unhurriedly. "Why don't we send out an invitation letter for the Radiants to send their top representative to participate? Since it only happens once every 10 years, I'm sure the Chancellor himself will join. As long as we don't let him win in the end, the reputation of our Herbalist Society won't be affected." Someone immediately voiced his agreement. "Chairman, I think the Elder's idea is feasible. As long as the Radiance is eliminated, others will think that they are inferior to us when it comes to herbalism."
"Are you joking? This is the ultimate skill of the Herbalist Society,"
another chimed in. "Right. We'll use the Herbalist Society to crush the Radiants. We'll let those rats who don't know the difference between life and death see who's better at herbalism," the elder agreed. "When the time comes, as long as the chairman asks me to step in, I'll definitely make those bastards from the Radiants lose everything." The Herbalist Society's members in the chairman's office were all boiling with excitement. They were suddenly full of confidence once again. The chairman gently waved his arm a few times. His tightly knitted brows relaxed slightly, and he said, "All right. Then we shall make our move at the upcoming pill-gathering battle." As if he had suddenly thought of something, the chairman once again shifted his gaze towards Nadia.
"Nadia, didn't you find a powerful genius who has the talent to concoct pills? His name is Kevin, right?"
"Yes, Chairman. His skill in concocting pills is definitely not inferior to any one of us from the Herbalist Society. When Herman Thompson, a prominent family patriarch from the Midwest, was in critical condition, he was able to give him both the stabilizing pill and the life prolongation pill to save his life. Moreover, he even went a step further, providing Herman and his son Joseph some harmony pills to cure the root of their illness after correctly diagnosing it with just one look." Nadia roughly recounted the recent events that she'd witnessed. Following her statement, the entire office gradually quieted down. Nadia mentioned 3 types of pills that even the Herbalist Society either couldn't perfectly refine or didn't have the formula to in the first place.
"Then why didn't you absorb him into our Herbalist Society?"
the chairman asked with some dissatisfaction. Logically speaking, Nadia shouldn't have let such a good talent go in vain. "I tried my best, Chairman. I've made him countless offers, boasting to him about all the perks of becoming a member each time. I even guaranteed that as long as he is willing to join the Herbalist Society, he'll immediately be able to become an elder with his skills. However, he still rejected me," Nadia admitted in a slightly depressed and defeated tone.
"That's enough. I get it. Bring some elders back with you to the Midwest immediately. We have to recruit Kevin even if it means resorting to some tricks."
The eyes of the chairman sparkled. He would never let such a talent slip through his fingers. "Yes, Chairman," everyone replied in unison. Meanwhile, in her bedroom at the Hayes family mansion, Phoebe was sitting on the bed in a daze. Although the city lights outside were bright and bustling, there was no hint of sparkle in her heart. It was as if she'd lost interest in everything. Behind her was the luxurious wedding dress that she was going to wear the next day. Perhaps this was what every woman wanted. Phoebe had also longed for this day to come, but she never thought that she would end up marrying a stranger whom she had no emotional connection with. "Kevin, are you okay now? Do you know that I'm getting married tomorrow? Will you come to give me your blessing when the time comes?" Phoebe thought to herself as tears fell from the corner of her eyes. At the same time, in another room not far away from Phoebe's, Jared Hayes and his father Clifford were looking intently at each other as they sat down.
"Is everything prepared for tomorrow's wedding?" Clifford asked with a cold expression.
"Rest assured, Father. I've already arranged everything according to your plan. Not only have I invited members of many prestigious families, but the leaders of the 10 major schools will also be there," Jared humbly shared. Ever since he'd been humiliated by the Williams Company, his father had never shown him any sympathy. Furthermore, he still had many questions about the wedding, but was hesitant to ask his father.
"If you have something on your mind, then go ahead and say it. Don't just stand there and stare at me blankly. You're wasting my time."
There wasn't a trace of joy on Clifford's face. It was as if the person who was going to get married the following day wasn't his son, but an arch enemy whom he had a deep grudge with. "There's one thing I don't understand. Why do we have to invite the 10 great schools to the wedding? Although they're quite powerful with their herbalism and martial arts skills, how will they benefit us?" In Jared's opinion, the leaders behind the so-called herbalism schools were nothing more than a group of greedy and scheming men.
"Do you really think your wedding is the most important thing tomorrow? Don't be such a dumbass," Clifford scoffed at his son. "Have you forgotten about our plans?"
Jared's eyes suddenly widened when he remembered. 3 years before, the Hayes family had secretly decided to gather as much useful information as they could about each of the 10 great schools, as well as the underground organizations that they were up against. With rumblings of an upcoming showdown between the forces of good and evil, Clifford figured that he could use all of that intel as a bargaining chip, and whoever was willing to pay for that information would have a chance to control the outcome.
"As long as the leaders of the 10 major schools show up tomorrow, we can find an opportunity to eavesdrop on their plans. And without them knowing, we shall eventually pull the strings to manipulate their every move behind the scenes. By playing such a pivotal role in their war, the Hayes family will definitely prosper for the rest of our lives."
A hint of intense fervor was apparent in Clifford's demeanor. All of a sudden, Clifford shattered the door of the room with a single punch. This generated a loud noise which attracted the attention of various guards as they rushed towards the room to check on their boss.
"All of you can go back now. Don't make such a big fuss over nothing," Clifford ordered.
"Yes, sir," the group of guards answered respectfully before leaving. What no one noticed was that beads of sweat appeared on the forehead of one of the guards, and there was even a look of strong urgency in his eyes.
"Chancellor, I must inform you of all of this as soon as possible," the guard thought to himself.
He was the spy that Spencer had arranged to work for the Hayes family. His ears had been pressed outside the door of the room where Clifford and Jared were, and he had been able to eavesdrop on the conversation between the two. Fortunately, he'd sensed Clifford's powerful aura approaching and was able to run away quickly before the door had been smashed, so he wasn't caught on the spot. Meanwhile, in New York City, Thomas was looking troubled as he drank some vodka alone in his study at the Williams family mansion. Suddenly, he heard a puzzled voice. "What's the matter, Thomas? Why are you so distressed?" Then the woman slowly walked into the room and sat down on a chair across from Thomas. He wondered what she could possibly be doing there.
"Director Silver, why are you still awake?"
Thomas answered her question with his own question. When Thomas took over as patriarch of the Williams family, they'd converted a guest house for them to use. And since the arrival of Ariana, Several key figures from the union had been living in the Williams family mansion, including Renee Silver. In any case, the Williams family was rich and powerful, so they didn't have to worry about having a few more mouths to feed. And with the union acting as a protective force, Thomas didn't have to worry about anybody causing trouble for his family. Moreover, the members of the union were also sent into the Williams family's business as part of their training. So it was a mutually beneficial partnership, and the relationship between the two parties was getting better and better with each passing day. However, the Williams family had also made sure to keep this a secret. After all, joining the union wasn't something that the other organizations would like to see. I can't sleep much. It's been a while since Randall Williams passed away, but I still haven't completed the task he entrusted to me when he was still alive. I have to kill that piece of trash Kevin with my own hands. Renee seethed fiercely. After seeing Ariana being badly injured by Kevin, Renee had been unable to swallow her resentment. Since then, she'd been training day and night, hoping that her strength base could break through to the next level as soon as possible.
There's no need to blame yourself, Director Silver.
Thomas knew what to say. Rest assured, Thomas, I've already sent someone back to the union headquarters to report this matter. Furthermore, I've also invited some of my most trusted people. They should arrive here to help us out soon. When the time comes, I'll help the Williams family get rid of that good-for-nothing nephew of yours. When Renee suddenly waved her arm, the air around them seemed to vibrate.
Director Silver, you don't have to take my father's words to heart,
Thomas said with a bitter smile. Thomas knew that Kevin was too smart now. Even his wife and mother-in-law couldn't be found, so how much more difficult would it be to find a trace of him? Your father had a close relationship with the union, so I owe it to him to avenge his death. Furthermore, that bastard Kevin is bold and reckless. He's done many despicable things, and he deserves to pay for his sins. The more Renee spoke, the greater the fury in her heart became. As this head of a prestigious organization, if I don't kill him, I'll be ashamed to lead my members in eradicating evil and spreading good deeds. Thomas gritted his teeth and said,
Actually, I have a way to deal with Kevin, but I don't know if you'd be up for it or not.
How? Renee's eyes suddenly lit up upon hearing this.
Kevin has a strong energy base, but those around him aren't necessarily protected by anyone. If we can capture the people he cares about, he'll be forced to come out of hiding to save them.
Thomas didn't dare to say it too openly. After all, taking hostages wasn't an honorable thing to suggest. I have to say, that's a really good idea. Due to her excitement, Renee slapped the table between them and added, Kevin is very cunning about his whereabouts, but his wife and friends are surely somewhere in Chicago. After thinking for a while, Renee continued, I'll personally go to Chicago tomorrow and capture them all.
Thank you, Director Silver.
Thomas nodded his head approvingly. All along, this was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to use the union to handle Kevin on his behalf. This way, even if the matter was exposed, it wouldn't have much of a negative impact on the Williams family, given that they had only been working with the union in secret. Early the next morning at the Hayes family mansion in Detroit, a huge garden had been decked out with elegant wedding signs, flowers, and decorations all over. Even before the wedding ceremony was to begin, the staff members of the Hayes family were already busy making sure that there would be delicious food and lots of wine for the reception. They also invited a band to play some romantic music throughout the event as well. Almost everyone in Detroit knew that it was Jared Hayes' wedding day. He was the well-loved son of the powerful Hayes family, and he was marrying Phoebe Anderson, who was the daughter of a prominent jewelry and antique appraiser in Chicago. Because the Hayes family had a lot of prestige in Detroit, there was an endless stream of guests who had come to attend the day's wedding festivities. All of them were well-dressed, rich, powerful, and successful people, and their expensive cars were parked all around the mansion. Congratulations, Clifford. Your son is getting married today, so I came here specially to congratulate you and your family," one of Clifford's business associates exclaimed. "You'll definitely be able to expand your business in Chicago after your son officially marries the daughter of the Anderson family," another family friend praised it. As Clifford responded with a smile to all of the guests' congratulatory words, the entire mansion was enveloped in a joyous atmosphere. Of course, not everyone there was happy. While Phoebe's father, Truman Anderson, tried his best to hold back his tears and smile in front of everyone, he gave off a lonely and sad vibe as he mostly shied away from all the public attention. As a father, he hoped his daughter would be euphoric on the day of her wedding. However, when Truman had checked on Phoebe earlier, she had a melancholy expression on her face that broke his heart. Meanwhile, a luxurious Tesla had just pulled up outside the Hayes family mansion. At the moment, the two men inside seemed to be talking and weren't in a hurry to get out of the car. "No way, Kevin. You're making me go back to St. Louis 2 days later just to attend someone else's wedding? Did someone invite you?" Thornton was unwilling to cooperate. After all, as the future head of the Huxley family, he didn't feel that it was necessary to go all the way to Detroit just to attend some random wedding. Besides, who would invite Kevin when he was based in Chicago? "Who told you that we can't come just because we're not invited? Isn't it more fun to crash a wedding?" Kevin's eyes were cold as he stared at the Hayes family mansion from the car. "What the hell? Are you planning to cause trouble here?" Thornton finally realized that something wasn't right. "I would rather tear down 10 companies than break up a marriage. If you want to go, you can go alone. I'll just wait here in the car. I don't want to take part in your wicked scheme." "Do you have a choice? Aren't you still my personal assistant? Besides, we're already here, so there's no reason not to congratulate the happy couple. I can't wait to give them my big surprise as well." After Kevin said this, he opened the car door and playfully shoved Thornton out. "What was that for?" Thornton complained as he almost fell to the ground. "It seemed like you needed an extra push." Kevin tidied up his clothes. He recalled that in the past 3 years, it had been others who had always been bullying and insulting him. It felt refreshing to casually turn the tables around with Thornton now. At this time, Phoebe was sitting in front of the dressing table while 5 or 6 staff members helped her into her dress and did her hair and makeup. With tears still falling from her face, she stared blankly at herself in the mirror as she helplessly awaited her fate. So even if the words devastatingly beautiful could be used to describe Phoebe's appearance, it would be useless to admire someone who is so miserable at her own existence. Just then, the door to the room suddenly opened. Jared, who was wearing a handsome suit, walked inside with a confident smile. However, when he saw Phoebe crying, his expression suddenly became gloomy. "Why are you crying on such a happy day? Don't tell me that marrying me still makes you feel upset." Jared scolded her coldly. "Marrying you is just a business deal," Phoebe replied without turning her head. "In just a few moments, you'll officially be my wife. Without my permission, you can't think of other men. I won't allow you to subconsciously cheat on our marriage like that." Jared clenched his fist tightly. When they heard this, the staff members quickly tidied Phoebe's wedding dress and left the room. They didn't want to get caught in the middle of their argument. "Although I'll become part of the Hayes family, you still can't control my heart," Phoebe stubbornly insisted. "I'm not afraid to tell you this today. No matter how much you think about him, it's useless. That man you've been pining over is already dead," Jared laughed mockingly. Phoebe suddenly stood up and turned around to look at him in panic. She shouted in disbelief. "That's impossible. Kevin will never die. He'll definitely recover with the rejuvenation pill." "Do you really think my father gave you the rejuvenation pill?" Jared enjoyed Phoebe's reaction. "Well, here's the truth. That pill we gave you is actually just a piece of processed chocolate." Phoebe's face immediately turned pale when she heard that. She adamantly shook her head. "No, that can't be. You're just lying to me because you want me to give up on Kevin. He's fine, right?" Kevin's survival was the only thing in her heart that had been keeping her alive. Now that Jared actually revealed that the pill was fake, how could she calm down? After all, the only reason she agreed to the marriage was to save Kevin. So if he didn't get the rejuvenation pill, she would rather die along with him. This had Phoebe so upset that she just wanted to slam her head on the dressing table repeatedly until she died. However, Jared's eyes were sharp. He grabbed her wrist and taunted her. "You really want to go to hell with your sweetheart that badly? Well, I won't let you." "Hey, let go of me," Phoebe begged him as she helplessly tried to free herself from his hold. "Didn't I tell you that you better stay by my side in the future? Don't forget that your father is here today. If you dare to play any tricks on me, I can assure you that he'll suffer an incomparably miserable fate," Jared threatened her. Ever since Phoebe came to the Hayes family mansion, she'd never given him the time of day. This had deeply wounded his ego, which had now reached a boiling point. If Phoebe would never love him, then he vowed to make the rest of her life even more miserable than death itself. Phoebe began to tremble in fear. "You—" "The wedding is about to begin." Jared suddenly let go of Phoebe's hand and interrupted her. "I'll ask someone to come back here to fix you up. In the meantime, I advise you to think about your father's well-being." With that, Jared left the room. In his mind, as long as the wedding pushed through, he would have plenty of opportunities to make her life a living hell in the days, weeks, and years to come. As soon as Phoebe was alone, her face was filled with despair, as tears endlessly flowed from her eyes once again. "Kevin, you're not dead, are you? I've let you down," Phoebe thought helplessly. "What should I do now?" Just as Kevin was about to enter the mansion with Thornton trailing reluctantly behind him, he was stopped by two of the Hayes family guards. "Please, show us your invitations," a man asked politely as he smiled at them. "Invitations?" Kevin slightly raised his eyebrows. "We don't have any.